Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to make this video to share a thought that I've been having for a while, and I've touched on it a little bit, which is the changing nature of these large enterprise sales deals. I've never worked as an account representative or an account executive or even a BDR or an SDR, but it's funny building a startup. You can kind of see our competition who follow this more traditional enterprise B2B software model, and I think it's hard to justify that, especially with the rise of AI, and I'll tell you why. Basically for these large enterprise contracts, and I'm not talking about smaller deals, right? Like I'd say probably under $100,000. If you need to spend $20,000 here, $30,000 here for software, like I'm not talking about that. I'm talking really about, I'd say, 100K plus, maybe 75K plus, but really 100K or somewhere in that range. If you're selling software for that size, I feel like there's really kind of two main goals. If you're an account executive or really the corporation selling that tool, the first is, are you qualified? Is the lead actually qualified? And then the second is, if they are qualified and there's budget, what are they willing to pay? And what they're willing to pay really kind of dictates what the annual, contract value will be. That's why there's no pricing, right, on the website for these deals. And the more expensive the software is from an engineering standpoint, you start to think, okay, how can this be justified? And I'll use a really kind of trite example, which is DocuSign. I saw Austin, I think his name is Alright or Albert. He's on Twitter, but he is one of those. He runs one of those like coding boot camps. I'm blanking on which one, but he's pretty active on Twitter. He lives in, I think, Salt Lake, and he's like, he basically was like, why am I paying six figures to DocuSign? And I don't know exactly what the contract value was, but he's basically like, why are we paying 6+ figures to DocuSign? And if you really think about it, it's like, all right, why would anyone be paying 6+ figures to DocuSign? Like, signing a legally bound electronic document is really easy. I understand there's some complexities, and there's HIPAA compliance or different compliance for different scenarios, but all of that is open source. Like, how do you justify that? Now, okay, you could say, all right, the legal authorities and blah 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 blah. Sure, I understand that. Okay, maybe you don't build the house internally, but why is the tool hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases? I don't care if you're Amazon or you're Tesla or Nvidia. Like, no one should be paying that much money for an electronic signature tool. It's crazy. And this is obviously just one example, and I understand DocuSign provides other services as well, so it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but ultimately where I'm getting at here is the value of these contracts has nothing to do with how much it costs to produce the software and the margins associated with running that business. It has to do with how much are you willing to pay for it. And a lot of buyers are just uneducated, right? Or they don't understand kind of the technical complexities, right? And that's why you have people, paying for these services that are really, really inexpensive, from a compute standpoint or just from an engineering standpoint. And it's just interesting to see from an engineering standpoint, because I don't think the buyer of DocuSign, right? And I'm not trying to like pick on DocuSign, so don't come after me, guys. But the buyer of something like a DocuSign or a revenue management tool or a lead gen tool is thinking, okay, like how much does it cost to actually make this, right? But if their budget is super high and the they give that information out, or it's known to the seller, like they're going to be ripped off. And that's ultimately, again, why there's no pricing on the website. So where I'm going with this is, I think this has to change with AI, because I don't care how big of an organization you are. If you're currently being charged, $100,000 for a simple tool, or $500,000 for a more complex tool, or in some cases, some of these contracts with larger implementers are millions of dollars, right? Like, you're going to tell me it's going to cost $10 million or $5 million in some cases, sometimes more, to build an inventory management system, right? Like, that is insane. And so maybe that was true 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But today with AI, you're telling me you couldn't have 3 or 4 amazing engineers build that? I think you absolutely could. I don't care how complex the software is. Really, anything that doesn't involve space or complex hardware, I don't see how, given at least 2 or 3 months, if you hire 3 to 4 engineers, a company can't get 90 to 95% of the value for said tool, right? Like, if you take a tool like Workday or some of the tools in Salesforce or SAP, engineers could build that really easily, especially now with some of the AI Copilot tools. And if you break down the cost, it's like, all right, maybe I'm paying these engineers, let's say on the high end, $300K, right? Okay, I'm paying them $300K. I'll add another, kind of 25% or so for benefits. Let's call it $1.2 million. Some of these contracts, right, are $10 million. Like, the return on investment just doesn't make any sense. So again, the smaller the contract value, the less this applies. But the larger the contract value, the more I look at these things from an engineering standpoint, I'm like, how is this even possible? Like, how do people get away with this? Is it buyers or champions at the company, or these executives don't really understand they're being ripped off? So anyways, I could go on for a long time about it. I think pricing transparency is coming to enterprise software, which helps everyone. Our startup Prognosis, like, we put our pricing on our website. Obviously, if there's some super complex integration, like, yeah, we'll probably charge extra for it. Or there's some really complex use case, yeah, we'll probably charge extra for it, but we're going to be very transparent. And 99.9% of customers are going to fit in our base package, which again is published on our website. So I think pricing transparency will be really good for everyone. Hopefully it's coming in the industry. I think people will still want enterprise software. I think people and companies still value, someone who's dedicated to solving a particular problem and will have, an opinion on how to solve each problem. But, as contract values go up, people really need to be looking at this, and companies need to be looking at it not only from a buyer standpoint, but also from an engineering and financial standpoint, saying, all right, does it actually cost this much to build the software? I understand, folks want to make money, but, why are they marking this up to the point that they are? So I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know. Maybe this doesn't resonate. But yeah, I think it's really insane watching some of these enterprise deals happen, and specifically for the industry I'm in, who've written every single line of code. I know the complexities, I know what it takes, and the cost that some folks are charging is just insane. So I think that'll change over time, and I think that will be beneficial for everyone in enterprise software. So appreciate it, everybody. Thanks.